So going back to the story about the shipwreck, what's a quick summary of that story?
It's hard to make a quick summary, but people want to know how we happened to come to be wrecked in the first place. And that's the beginning of the story, which is that we were hired to search the uninhabited islands between the Marquesas Islands and Pitcairn. The Marquesas Islands from which we left to go to Pitcairn Island to look for a boat that had disappeared. Those are the windward islands of French Polynesia, the closest to the Western Hemisphere continents. And the boat that was missing was named the Astria. It was registered in New York City and has never been found, and that was in the 1960s. That was in the 1960s.
That's when it disappeared.
It disappeared must have been 63. It was 8 months disappeared when we arrived just before Christmas in the Marquesas Islands. And we met a trade schooner there. We had seen wreckage on an uninhabited island of the Marquesas, an outlying island that is, as I said, was uninhabited. We had seen painted compound curved shape that looked like the side of a wooden yacht. A big piece of painted what looked like wood with curved shape on the rocks as we sailed close past this island, because we like to visit that island, and that's another story. But around the corner from the painted wreckage that we saw straight, perfectly straight, long things that looked like timbers, pieces of wood. 3 groups of them standing on end, close to sea level, standing up against the cliff. And we couldn't think of any way they could be standing up against the cliff. They must have been, at least 12 or 15 feet long. We couldn't figure any way they could be standing up except by human hands. And so we looked. We thought that, there had been a shipwreck there. We sailed around this island, Awahnee Island, spelled E-I-A-O. And we didn't see any smoke, any flags, any sign of human habitation there. But we had to go on because we hadn't entered the country yet, so we had to go to a port of entry and check in. And the gendarme there who checked us in just brushed it off. We told him about it, and he says, Japanese fishing boat. He wasn't interested in a Japanese fishing boat. So later on, a trade schooner came in while we were still there, and the captain of the trade schooner, when he heard our sighting, said, "Oh, wait a minute." And he went to his radio log, and there was a report of a missing yacht that had been not seen for 8 months since it had left Mexico, and had 8 people on it. And so we thought we could go back up there, but the gendarme wouldn't let us go back up there. He insisted that we go to Tahiti and check in there. This is, turn it off for a second. Yeah, well, I'm just going to talk. We're just going to jump in at the wreck. So, what was the last? Can you play it back or not? Oh, people want to know how we came to be wrecked.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we were investigating uninhabited reefs and islands in the far eastern dimensions of the French Polynesia on our way between the Marquesas Islands and Pitcairn Island, which is a trip of maybe 1,200 miles or 1,500 miles. And we were looking for smoke, flags, some indication of human occupation, because the idea was that in 8 months' time, if they had come to wrecked on an inhabited island, some kind of news, even if they had all died or something, the news that a boat had wrecked on the reef, or if there were survivors, of course, it would have been known that this boat wrecked, and there had been no such news. So we were looking only at the uninhabited islands. So we came to this island named Vahunga at late afternoon, and it was too late to go around the island. It was a small atoll island. The lagoon was about 2 miles in diameter, and it was just a rim of sandy soil and coconut trees above the water's edge. And so it looked like a donut. It was the shape of a donut, so only a thin donut. So we didn't have time to search the island properly before dark. And so it was too deep to anchor off the island, and it was too dangerous to anchor in close to the island because of the coral reef out there. And so we figured we the way you calculate your distance off, it's not a calculation, it's an estimation. So the way you estimate your distance off from an atoll island where the highest land is maybe 10 feet above sea level is that you look at the coconut trees. Mature coconut trees are about 100 feet high. And you say, well, we must be, by experience, you see them on the horizon, and you can figure we're about 3 miles off. That's what we wanted to be, about 3 miles off, drifting in the ocean, so we could find the island again in the morning and come in and go around it and search it. So the water was too deep 3 miles off to anchor. And so we hove to with the boat, with sails still up, but sort of canceling each other out, the way you try to make a sailing boat stand still. And we stood watch during the night. We had dinner, and I stood the first watch. I was off at midnight. And my husband came up at midnight, and I went down to go sleep. We were only 3 on board, my husband, myself, and our 10-year-old son. So he went up at midnight, and about a half hour later, just as I was falling off to sleep, he called me up on deck and said, "What's that? What's that?" And we were seeing, every now and then we'd see this burst of white off the port bow. And we couldn't see the island. It was just black dark. We couldn't see the island. We couldn't see the reef. We couldn't see anything. We didn't know where we were. And we thought that had to be danger. That had to be a breaking wave that was hitting something. So we turned away from it. But we had reduced the size of the sails. The wind was there, but it was light. And so with the shortened sails, it took us a while to get momentum on the boat. And steerage way, you can't steer a boat unless you're moving forward. You can turn the rudder hard over, nothing happens. So we were finally getting steerage way. I was on deck trying to go before the wind, and my husband Bob went down to start the engine, our brand new engine, which was a hand crank 3-cylinder Yanmar diesel. And the design of our boat had the engine set at a little angle to straight fore and aft, because the stern of the boat was boat hadn't been designed to have an engine in it, and the stern was too fine to take the bearings and surroundings necessary for putting a shaft out the stern, straight out the stern. So the engine had been put in a slight angle, and the propeller was off center on the port side of the rudder. And just as we were getting underway and getting good steerage on the boat, I saw a string of white water in the water, and we were diverging from it slightly. And I called down, to Bob, who was still trying to crank the engine, and I said, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay." And just then the engine started, and we had a little momentum, and the off-center prop turned us to the right, to the starboard side, and we crashed right into the outer coral of the reef on the island of Vahunga, which we couldn't even still see the island. The reef was extremely wide, and we couldn't see the island. We didn't know where we were. And so we decided, and we hold the boat when the water starts coming up, from the bow, and it gets deeper and deeper. And we went. The boat seemed to be pretty stable. Bob took an anchor out ahead. He jumped off the bow. The bow was, hard to ground, so you could just step out onto whatever the bow was on. We realized it was a reef, and he walked the anchor, and I paid out anchor chain and everything to him. He walked it until the water got deeper, too deep for him to carry the anchor, so he put the anchor down. He was afraid we might tip and fall off the outer edge of whatever we were aground on, and that would have been disastrous, So we made the anchor fast. He came back. We were flooding. Still, the water still wasn't up all the way, and we started pushing things up on the cabin top, which was dry and above the sea. And so we threw our navigation gear and whatever was at hand in the main cabin, just threw it right up on the deck, on the cabin top. But we decided to stay with the boat until dawn. And when the dawn broke, we saw this atoll island in the distance. I mean, it was far away. And when we finally took our first load of salvaged gear, as far ashore as we could get it on the between the coral heads. You could walk on the coral heads, and there was kind of channels between them, so you could walk ashore for quite a distance, and then it got too difficult to move. And when we first went ashore, we saw that the coconut trees that were closest to us were a new plantation. They were only about 30 feet high, and the lagoon just happened to be about 2 miles wide, and it had mature coconut trees on it. So we don't know which trees we were looking at, but the previous night, we were 3 miles away from 100-foot trees, and we were 1 mile away from 30-foot trees. And so we were caught in the current that comes down with the trade winds. Trade winds make surface current, and the current hits the island and then splits and has to go around the island in a swirl, and there's a reverse eddy really close to the island before the water joins together again and keeps on traveling in the current. And so we must have been in that reverse eddy too close to the reef and brought onto the reef by the reverse eddy behind the reef. So there we were, and it was an uninhabited island, we thought. And we had a big bottle of water, a big 5-gallon emergency bottle of water by the hatch, and we took that ashore and we made a shelter out of a sail, and we spent our time diving we didn't have to dive yet, we could go aboard, and then it's a really eerie feeling to swim inside your boat and open up cabinets and underwater and pull the stuff out. You're holding your breath, you know. But anyway, we emptied the boat as much as we could for 3 days, and on the third day, it was out there, it looked almost like it was anchored out there. The mast was still standing and you could see the bow. The bow was tipped down, but you could still see the whole length of the boat above the water. And it was just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And on the third day, the boat had been working in the water, and the coral reached the mast step where the mast came down to the very keel of the boat, and it couldn't. The wooden hull couldn't yield anymore to the friction, you know, of the reef, and so the whole force and weight of the boat caused the mast and the hull to break away from the keel, and it fell down towards us, and it was really horrible.
I bet it was.
And so on that day we ran out of water also, and we had looked across the lagoon on the previous days, and we had seen a straight line close to the lagoon horizon, and straight lines like that don't occur in nature. You know, we thought it had to be a roof line or a building or something. So we took our little dinghy across the island, which was only about 100 yards wide, and put it in the water of the lagoon, and we sailed towards this long straight line, and it did turn out to be a building. And when we got close, there was a man there.